And with us in studio is international political commentator Mr. Tom Gross. Mr. Gross, thank you for being with us.
Evening.
As Jonathan had mentioned, the vote is just a week away, and in the wake of this tragedy, campaigns have been suspended, but the vote will remain on next Thursday. Now, why do you believe is the Leave campaign gaining so much support in the UK over the last couple of weeks?
Well, I think it's part of a broader discontent, not just in Britain, but in the entire Western world, with what one might call the establishment. I would connect it, for example, to the rise in support for Donald Trump. He's now running neck and neck in certain polls in the US. In the UK, almost every leading political figure, apart from Boris Johnson and Michael Gove, but all the former Labour and Conservative Prime Ministers are all arguing for Britain to stay in the EU. But people are so angry with the establishment, with their feeling lack of representation. There's a kind of surge in support for Brexit, as it's called, and it's quite disturbing because some of the campaigning has been very heated. It has let out some nationalist demons out of the bottle, and it's possible that today's assassination of a British Member of Parliament is indeed directly connected to her very strong campaign for Britain to stay in the European Union.
Now, is it dangerous for Britain to leave the EU? And in a broader picture, what would be the consequences not only for Britain, the European Union, but for the Western world?
Well, I mean, I understand why there's a lot of frustration with the EU. It is definitely a far from perfect organisation. Nevertheless, it's what we've got. So we have international institutions which ought to be reformed, the EU, the UN and so on. But just to leave them could lead to their crumbling, could lead to their disintegration. If Britain leaves the EU, other Western European countries like Denmark, the Netherlands and others may follow suit, and the European Union may crumble. And if you look at a broader perspective of European history, it's basically non-stop conflict and war for the last 2,000 years. In the last 70 years, since the conclusion of the Second World War, with the tragic exception of Yugoslavia, there has not been conflict in Europe of any serious kind. And I don't think that's just because of NATO. I think it's the EU. It makes it very difficult to imagine conflict or fascistic parties and so on. So I think it's dangerous if Britain leaves.
And Mr. Gross, quickly, looking elsewhere, how could this affect the Middle East and Israel?
Well, one consequence, by the way, in Britain is the ruling British Conservative Party could tear themselves apart following this vote, allowing in the Labour Party, which is led by Jeremy Corbyn, one of the most anti-Israel politicians in the world, certainly in the Western world. And at the present time, he has little chance of becoming the next British Prime Minister. However, were the Tory party, the Conservatives, to turn in on themselves after this vote, which could very well happen, Labour could come through, and this will be a very radical government, certainly hostile to Israel. I also think that in general the West needs to be strong, and the EU, for all its faults, is a sign of strength with the West. And already we see in the Obama presidency in the United States a decline of Western power. I don't think it's good for the world, or the Western or democratic world, to weaken the institutions we've got. And for sure the EU is one of those institutions, and for sure would be weakened if Britain leaves.
Mr. Tom Gross, thank you very much for joining us in just a week ahead of the Brexit referendum in the United Kingdom.